So, in this episode, we go over comics, comic characters, and all that fun stuff with Musa. It's really cool, it's a lot of fun, and it's really informative. So, check that out, check out the other interviews with other people, and have fun with that. And that's enough of me. Let's hear from him. Hello, my name's Scott. This is another interview I'm doing for my main video about comics and the perspectives on different interpretations and what it means, how important is it, and matter if it's straightforward or more skewed. And this is my guest, Musa.
Hey, do you want me to introduce myself now?
Yeah, go
All
for
right,
it.
yeah, so hey, I'm Musa. I'm an aspiring film critic, I guess. And yeah, I've been reading comics since, I guess, 2013, since Man of Steel, basically. That kind of, I had seen comic book movies before that, but kind of the visual aesthetic and kind of how they aestheticize the powers and the person of Superman, that kind of made me want to get interested in the character. And then I started branching out from there.
So just to go on from that, you said you started in 2013. Would you say you started off with the New 52 comics then?
No, I started off with All Star Superman just because that's the
You
comic
started off a little strong. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the comic I heard most about, and that's not really a good starting point just because I feel like you need to know a little bit about Superman's history and how he got to that point just to make it click more clearly, because Grant Morrison is very into the history of the superheroes and the history of the universe itself. He wrote Multiversity, which is puts everything into perspective like that. So that was not a good starting point. And then I haven't actually read New 52 that much. I kind of mostly went off to the graphic novels, Superman for All Seasons. That was one I read.
Yeah, with Tim Sale, Jeff Loeb.
Yeah, just because that was the origin, so I went to that. And then Superman, Peace on Earth, I sought that out just because I like the art so much. And then after that, I started kind of getting more into the character and then branching off of there.
I think that's funny. I think you really hit it on the head with saying that's not a good starting point. It's because a lot of fans love that story, but they don't understand they love it because they've already read so much Superman. And I'm a new fan, it's I'm not getting half of what you're throwing out there.
Yeah, it's impossible to pick. The artwork is great, so it's easy to get by on the art, but it's impossible to get invested just because there's so much. It's so dense with everything about Superman.
Yeah, I totally agree.
It's hard to figure it out.
So the first question I want to ask really is, who's your favorite character and how'd you learn about them?
It goes back and forth between Superman and Wonder Woman, just because Superman, because that's the first character I got into, and I probably read a little bit more Superman comics. But Wonder Woman, just because I feel like she is very empathetic. She's what we can aspire to be, but at the same time, she's a warrior. So she also can get serious real quick, and kind of, I think you see that in the film adaptations. You see that in her different comics, Azzarello's run in the New 52. I really liked a lot, just because it's so in depth with the Greek mythology, and the art is great, and it's very no nonsense. It's a hard PG-13, but then I also like the way Greg Rucka writes the character as well. It's two very different styling perspectives. Greg Rucka's run she's in the White House, she's an ambassador, so it's two different styles. But I just like the way she is drawn. She's I like her aesthetic a lot. The warrior, the way she's drawn is very iconic to me. And then I think a lot of the iconic things are put into the movies as well. The way she poses, the way she looks, it's very iconic to me. So that drew me first and foremost. And then once I started reading more comics with her in it, I was drawn to her a lot. So I guess it's between her and Superman.
That's fair. I think the New 52 for a lot of comics get a lot of flack, but I think it's really unfair for her run especially, because Azzarello's great on it. The artist Cliff Chiang does a great job, and it's super investing. They do a great job of reinventing the character, but at the same time keeping it very consistent to the way she's been written before. And I think that's what's so enticing about that one.
Yeah, exactly. Before I read that run, I knew she was kind of mythological. She had a lot of Greek myth history, but that one really tapped into that side of the character. She was going to she was visiting Hades and going into the underworld and all that stuff. So that kind of stuff really drew me to her. That was one of the first runs I read, I think. And then after that, I kind of branched out to other things.
Yeah, I also think it's great how the artist Cliff Chiang really reinvents a lot of looks for these characters. You say Hades, you're not going to think of how he drew Hades in that book.
Yeah, exactly. A lot of the New 52 tried to kind of reinvent the visual styles of the character. Even Grant Morrison's run, Grant Morrison's I think it was All Star Comics.
Action
Like when
Comics.
yeah, Action Comics,
Yeah.
Action Comics. Superman was in a T-shirt for a lot of his run, you know. So
Yeah.
that's not what you think of Superman. But yeah, I thought that was very interesting how they tried to reinvent the look and reinvent the aesthetic of the character.
I think it's funny too, considering how Action Comics was going on the same time as Superman, and the two looks they had were so polar opposite. Like one's a t-shirt and jeans, and the other one's the super armored suit. And
Yeah.
people either like that character simple, or they don't mind throwing some complexity onto it. And you have two extreme different visuals. It's like, dude, if you don't like that one, just read this book, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, Superman New 52 got a lot of flack, I think, just because it was a lot. It wasn't the Superman we're used to. It was
Yeah.
kind of a lot. It was a little darker. He wasn't as simplistic as a lot of people have read him before, you know? 'Cause he
Yeah.
was just, I guess. And
I've
yeah,
gone through most of that run, and I do think the writing does take a hit a lot of the issues in that, but I never think it's the character. I just think the writing team didn't have a lot to add to the universe. But then there's other books he's on. Like, you ever read Superman Wonder Woman, that series?
No, I haven't.
It's done by, I think Charles Soule does it. That's an awesome run. And I think people, when they like criticize Superman in the New 52, they only do like certain books about it that don't really showcase it as well as a book like that. Because when they established that whole relationship with those two, people either got really mad about it or like, yeah, whatever, I have nothing to lose. And that series was actually really good. I thought it was a great way of tying them in together.
Yeah, I mean, I know they have like a romance in that book, right? Kind of
Yeah.
like a yeah. I think people are just so used to like Superman and Lois. They don't want him to. They don't want him to branch out, I guess. But
I get it, but you know.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of the New 52, like, it had a lot of great books. Like Scott Snyder's Batman is pretty incredible, and I know like his main Joker story, it was Death of the Family, I think. I know that gets a lot of flack just because like Joker cuts off his face and then puts it back on and everything, and it's really weird. But
that's not his fault though, because that's Tony Daniel's fault.
Yeah, I mean, I like that. I like that story though. Like, I like reading it. I like kind of how it visualized. I like how it tied to all the books. Like, I like that story a lot. But I know that gets a lot of flack too. But yeah, I think there were good things in the New 52.
Oh yeah, 100%. I think people just like to criticize because it's an easy target, because it was mismanaged. Death of the Family, I can't see how people can say it's a bad book. I mean, there's things about it that are like you can have problems with, but you know, the whole idea of a comic really is the page turner aspect, where like, the next page, I'm really anxious and I'm excited to see what happens. Death of the Family is one of the first books in a long time where I actually had that happen, where I remember the conclusion when everybody has their face wrapped up, and it's like, I'm not gonna spoil it, but that was one of the first times I'm like, all right, I need to see what happens next. And then you see the next page, you know.
Yeah. I mean, that's the one of the books where I started reading it after it already started. And I just basically like went through the entire series in like a day.
Oh yeah.
I wanted to like know what would happen next. It was a real page turner. And also Gizmo's Batgirl. Again, she's not in the wheelchair, and I think a lot of people like that aspect of the character. But I think that run was like really good, and like what happened with their family and like her brother and all that stuff. I think that was also a real page turner for me.
Yeah, I think Gail Simone, I can't name many books she isn't good on. You know, I think she's one of my favorite writers in general at DC. And a lot of people do get mad about taking Oracle out of the wheelchair. I think putting her on the book at the beginning was the smartest choice. But the problem did stem from when she left the book. That's when more problems like arise, where it's like, all right, what do you do? They didn't know what to do. You know, they had Back Row at Burnside, which is a great book, but it's just like she's mischaracterized in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, that art style doesn't support the character in my opinion.
Yeah,
like that art style was very bright. It's like very sunny. I don't know. It just didn't like. It's a fine book, but it doesn't feel like I would want to. It doesn't feel like the character to me.
That's the thing. Like, I think I love the aesthetic of it. I think as like a YA novel book, it'd be awesome, but it doesn't fit main continuity, and that's the biggest problem from my perspective. As far as main continuity, Barbara's supposed to be like 25, 26, and she's acting like she's 19. It's like, yeah, I mean, whatever. If that's how you want to do it, that's cool. I'm not super interested.
Yeah, like it would be like a great one-off story, kind of like they're doing with like their teen line, like the Raven and Beast Boy book and things like that. It would fit perfectly like in that sort of off universe, but in the main universe, it didn't really feel like what I wanted to feel like. So.
Oh yeah, also characters that go in that book also get mischaracterized, and it's really tough.
Yeah, because
Um,
they have to fit that aesthetic. So yeah, it
my
definitely
my favorite character is Dick Grayson. I remember when he showed up in the book, it was really tough to read because it's like they categorize him as some like really like misogynistic asshole, and it's like, oh man, I'm glad I don't read this book.
yeah.
But going back to Superman and Wonder Woman, what's one word you would use to describe those characters?
I think Superman is. Superman. I would use to describe human, I guess, even though he's not technically human. But what I think of is like he is the most. He is the most human character because he wants to be human. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
Like he wants to be with Lois Lane. He wants to work at the Daily Planet, not just as a cover, but like that's what he actively wants to do with his life. You know, Superman is kind of like a side gig. Like he knows he has to be Superman, but he wants to be Clark Kent. He wants to be with Lois Lane. He wants to work a 9 to 5. Like to me, that like describes the character perfectly for me. Wonder Woman, I guess it would be. I mean, there's two words. It's like she's a warrior, but then she's also really empathetic. So it would kind of be, yeah, I guess. I describe her as a warrior just because like she's fought in wars. She's like from that culture. Like the way Zack Snyder visualized that culture in his Justice League is very 300-esque, for lack of a better term. So I mean, that's where she's from. She is a warrior. Like when she comes here and she has villains, she has to fight. She like knows what she's doing. So she is a warrior first. But I think what separates her from the Themyscirians and from other characters is like she has that duality. She's a warrior, but then she's also very empathetic. She knows she's an iconic figure, and she knows she has to live up to that ideal in a sense. Like Batman is great, but he's also like very one note. You know what I mean? Like he's very seeped in tragedy. He's very clinical with the way he thinks. It's facts first. He doesn't have much. He has an emotional core, but he never shows it. Like he knows he has to be like rough and brooding. Wonder Woman, she can be open and honest, but also she's a warrior. She can like fight. She knows she has those skills. She carries a sword and a shield. You know what I mean? So yeah, she has. I guess instead of warrior, it'd be like duality would be the word I describe her as.
I think it's fair. I think it's funny to have the choices between warrior and empathetic. Like it's tough, but like if you know the character, you totally understand it.
Yeah,
I think duality is a big thing that comes between most comic characters. You even brought up the fact about Superman, how like it's a side gig to him and he is Clark Kent. A lot of people tend to like look at the names of superheroes like Bruce Wayne, Clark Kent, and a lot of their dual identities as like just being facades. That's what I think is so interesting about Superman is that, Bruce Wayne, the name and like how he portrays himself is obviously a facade, but Clark Kent especially, it's like in his downtime, he likes being referred to as Clark. He likes being who he is, Maybe the whole image of him at the Daily Planet is skewed, obviously, but that name still has meaning to it.
yeah. I mean, with Superman, I think he knows he has to be a superhero just because like he has all this power and he needs to do something with it. He can't just sit around. He's Superman just because he's an alien who has all this power, and he has to channel that in a good way just because he's a good person. Like he can't just sit by and do nothing while things are happening. He knows he could stop crime, so he does it. But he wants to be Clark Kent, like he wants to work a 9 to 5. He wants to be with Lois. He wants to be human, even though he's tasked. He is Superman just because he knows he has to be Superman. With Batman, he trained specifically to be Batman, and he can't like shut his brain off to think in a different way. Even when he's out as Bruce Wayne, his mind is always thinking like Batman. So that's kind of the difference between the two. One is human, but he thinks like a superhero. The other is a superhero, but he thinks like a human. So that's kind of what's interesting between the two, and that's what makes their dynamic so interesting to me.
What property outside of comics do you think showcases your character the best?
For Superman, it would probably be. I mean, for me, it's Man of Steel, just because I love the way it's aestheticized. Like for me, one of the most iconic images of the character is kind of when he's about to take flight for the first time, and his fists are on the ground and everything's swirling around his hands, and then he just takes off. Like I've never seen flight aestheticized in that way before, with that much power, with that much force behind it, and I thought that was very, very interesting. And then at the end of the movie, like he knows he wants to be close to the ground. Like he goes to the planet, he introduces himself to Lois, kind of for the first time, even though she already knew who he was. Like that to me that introduced me to the character, and that's still what I think of when I think of Superman. And with Wonder Woman, I'd probably say her 2017 movie, just because for me that kind of picked up on both aspects of who the character is. Like in Wonder Woman 84, she sheds her sword and shield. She only has her lasso now. She's Even though I like that movie, she's very toned down from what she can be, just because she's not like in a war setting anymore. Like she knows she has to be a little bit toned down. And then in Snyder's Justice League that just came out, she is very warrior based. Like every action scene she's in, she's like not messing around. She has her sword and shield back, like she's slicing people. Like in her first bank robbery scene, like she kills those terrorists with her bracelets. So I mean, that's a very warrior aesthetic. That's like, even though I like that version of the character, that's not like, I think the 2017 movie like hits on both aspects very well. Like after No Man's Land and after she takes out that village, she's talking to all the people in the village, like introducing herself. They're thanking her, like things like that. I think kind of helped define the character. So I think Patty Jenkins like kind of nailed it with her first movie. And then even though I like the second movie, like it feels like Patty Jenkins like emphasized one aspect of the character and de-emphasized the other. So yeah, I think that's those two things for me.
Its second movie's gotten a lot of flack lately since it came out.
Yeah, no. I mean, I love the aesthetic of the character, like the way she's portrayed in that movie. But I think Wonder Woman 2017 still like was able to hone in on both aspects of who she is in a really interesting way for me.
I think it sucks for that second film a lot because people kind of use it to look down upon it. Like the first film wasn't so great since the second one's come out, and there's still even good aspects about the second film too. Like I think even her relationship with Chris Pine in that film is still really great, and a lot of the scenes there together is really powerful.
Yeah, and like I love when she knows she has to leave him and she's kind of running away, like she's walking and then goes into a run and she doesn't look back. I think that was a very powerful way to visualize it. And then she's the reason she knows how to fly. Like he's the reason she flies for the first time. I thought that was really cool. And yeah, and I also just like the opening mall scene where it's kind of like a throwback to like what a Wonder Woman movie would be like if it was in the 70s, like with Linda Carter. It kind of felt something like that. Like it's very goofy, but it's also like very bright and colorful and cheery, and she handles everyone in a very fun way. Like I love the way that was visualized.
No, I totally agree. My favorite scene is probably the one where her and Chris Pine are flying together and he's just like looking at the sky with the fireworks and how like enthralled he is from like just being in the jet.
Yeah.
It's like,
yeah, it was very nice way to kind of show like how awe-inspired he is by everything. He's like, he doesn't know how to handle it. He's just in awe of everything around him. It's very, very nice.
Do you think comic characters benefit in being adapted in so many varied mediums with all the different TV shows, movies?
Yeah, just because I feel like that's what people are introduced to when they start getting into comics. Like that's a lot of people's jumping off points. Like a lot of people started reading Batman because of the animated series.
Yeah.
Like for me, I became interested in like the Teen Titans once with the animated series from the mid 2000s. That kind of got me like Raven's still like one of my favorite characters specifically because of that animated series. And then I read her YA graphic novel and I like that a lot as well. And then when you're introduced to these characters and then you start going back, you realize how rich the history is, and you could kind of just pick and choose where you want to drop into and go from there, especially today, just because like if you go on Comixology, you could just rent out a bunch of things. Subscribe to DC Universe. If you subscribe to like the Marvel streaming app, like there's hundreds of thousands of comics just sitting there for you to read. Like you don't have to go to a comic book store just to get started. Like once you know what you're doing, then it becomes easier. But for now, if you want to just dive into a character, there's so much on your laptop or on your tablet or whatever.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, I have a 2, 3, 4 bookshelves just full of comics, but just having the app there, like I sometimes even pick up a book. It's like, you know, if you're on an app, you could just fling through like 30 issues in like a few hours and you're like, oh God, man, like I've already finished up the series entirely now. And it is easier than ever now, you know. It's $8 a month, and like if you go to a comic store, that's 3 comic books right there. And but that's just for 1 week, let alone I paid $8 this entire month and I can read whatever I want. That's for DC up to date until the last 6 months. I think Marvel Unlimited is the last year. So that's pretty cool. I mean, still definitely go buy individual comics. Don't just be like, oh, that sounds even great. No, like definitely go support them with buying issues on hand, especially with like indie publishers. But it is easier than ever. You know, you're exactly right when you say nobody, not nobody, but a good majority of people don't just go to a comic store, pick up a comic book and say, oh, wow, I really like this character. They get introduced with some form of medium, whether it's animation, which is a good majority of people, now live action interpretations with having 10 different CW shows,
Yeah.
and like Marvel has 1 to 2 movies a year, and now shows coming out too consistently. It's almost tough to not get invested in a superhero, at least, because there's so many properties that are being developed, even properties that kind of flip what it means to be a superhero like on its head, like The Boys, or even the show Invincible. Now like you get every variety of what it means to have the term superhero.
Yeah. Even for like something like The Walking Dead, I'm sure there were a lot of people that saw that show and liked it, and then found out later on that it was based on a comic, and then went to go pick up the comic just because they liked the show. So I mean, it just helps overall to get exposure to the medium, and then people can kind of go on exploring as they wish.
Another question I have is, do you think your character can create a persona of its own outside the comics? One of your characters is Superman, which entirely has done that.
Yeah.
If you ask me, there's only 3 characters that really have created a persona of its own. That is Superman, Batman, and Spider-Man, because there are precognitive ideas in almost everyone's head when they hear that name. Wonder Woman's one of the Trinity in the top 3 characters in DC, but to be fair, that name doesn't have an off the bat idea in most people's head. They'll know the name, they'll know the character, but they don't have an idea of it yet. Do you think she can get that in time?
I'm not even sure Superman really. I mean, people know Superman, but when they think of him, they think of like kind of a boring character. They think of like a perfect superhero. So I think even with Superman, like people have a misrepresentation of what they think of when they think of the character.
Oh,
But then
I would definitely agree. Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, if you go dive into the comics, and then there's so many different stories with so many. Some of them are like where he's kind of what people think of him. Then there are kind of others where they kind of dig into the philosophy of the character and kind of dig a little deeper. So I mean, but with Wonder Woman, I don't think so. Just because, and with time, maybe obviously, like she's getting a lot more exposure now. When people think of the character now, they'll probably think of the movies. So that will help her kind of get more exposure outside of the medium. And even if you never read a Wonder Woman comic, I'm sure there are a lot of people that now have a pretty firm grasp on who the character is. So she is kind of getting that notoriety. And even before a movie, like people knew the symbol of Wonder Woman. You know, they knew what the W was and meant. Even if they didn't like know the character, they knew what that symbol represented. So I mean, it is becoming easier to gain an understanding of these characters outside of the comic. Like even with Marvel, I think when people think of Tony Stark, they think of Robert Downey Jr. now. They're not necessarily thinking of the comic character. They're thinking of his portrayal, and then if they've read the comic, they can kind of compare and contrast. But if they haven't, they still know who Iron Man is because of RDJ. So I mean, I think a lot of characters are starting to get that notoriety because of their movie counterpart.
I would agree. I think bringing up Iron Man's a great example, because that's why when I say characters like Batman, Superman, and Spider-Man, you even said how people will consider that precognitive idea of Superman as him being boring. I'd agree. People have an idea. Usually it's a bad one, but like they'll be like, when someone says Superman, either they think of something like Christopher Reeve's movies, or just the idea of, oh, he's super strong, there's no whatever. I don't agree with it. But especially with Iron Man, I think it's great to bring him up, because in 30 years, how much notoriety will Iron Man have as a name once these movies aren't being made anymore? Is he still going to be a household name, or will that go away? Will they do something new, try to rebrand the character or something? Because that's why Spider-Man, Superman do have that value. There is so many different portrayals, and as soon as one is done, they are gearing up to start to do another one pretty soon. And I'm always wondering to see what characters can also make that jump.
Yeah, I mean, I see what you mean, because with Iron Man, like he's so tied to RDJ. Even if they do reboot it, I think people will kind of go back and compare and contrast the two. And I'm not sure, and RDJ is so iconic that I'm not sure anybody would be able to kind of overtake that idea of who the character is. Just like with Superman, like a lot of people are so tied to Chris Reeve, like that is their Superman. And no matter who plays the character, unless you're like trying to be like Christopher Reeve, kind of like how I think the CW portrayal of him is kind of in that same mold. If you try to kind of break that mold for live action, then you're gonna split the audience, just because people already know who they like as Superman, And if you're not similar to that, then they might not like you. You know what I mean? So, and with Spider-Man, what helps him is that now Marvel has him. So I mean, before it was kind of people like Tobey Maguire, but he was never like iconic as the character. They like more of what Sam Raimi brought to it. And with Andrew Garfield, like a lot of studio meddling kind of ruined his chance. Even though that's my favorite portrayal personally, just because I feel like he got like the goofy comedy. He was always like behind on things. Like he was always trying to catch up, and that's a very iconic to the character to me. But people, a lot of what hampered that version is the movies around him felt very messy and felt very studio involved. So now that Marvel has them, people are starting to like kind of trust this portrayal more, and Tom Holland is becoming their version of the character just because he feels more in line with what they visualize when they with the character. So I think different interpretations help if you're not already tied to one specific interpretation of the character. But like with Superman, they know a lot of people know what Superman should look like because of Christopher Reeve. With Batman, I think people are more tied to the animated stuff on side of the Batman. Like Kevin Conroy is Batman, but I don't think people are as invested in a specific Batman because no Batman has really been able to gain notoriety because they're like iconic portrayal. You know what I mean? Like every live action Batman has tapped into different sides of the character, but no one has been able to overtake Kevin Conroy. So that's still Batman to a lot of people.
I think Kevin Conroy is a great example, is that for the whole different interpretations thing, the only reason to have a persona of your own is to have multiple interpretations, because then the name lives on as much as, whatever actor portrays them. With Batman, it's tough, and his longevity lasts more because when one actor does portray them, they can only portray one side of him. That's why Batman gets more popular, but not necessarily Christopher Bale gets more popular.
Yeah.
I think that's why he can stand the test of time. And, Superman has had so many different interpretations, live action especially, and yet still people go back to Christopher Reeves because it is almost like the precedent now, because that's very defining of not only that era, but a lot of eras after it. I think Spider-Man is so funny because really, you don't have a live action interpretation until Sam Raimi in 2002. And that film set such a high bar for Spider-Man for live action that you say like Andrew Garfield came after a lot of studio meddling, and then it's tough for him. He gets a lot of flack for, and I would agree, he's also my favorite, but he's looked down upon because of the films that he's in. And then Tom Holland comes out, and then, you have had 3 Spider-Men in 20 years, and the debates still go on and on and on about who's best, who's whatever, and it's synonymous with like the debates about who's the best Batman or Superman. But those characters, the debates can span 70 years. With Spider-Man, it's just 20 years. Like, I've experienced them all, let me tell you what I think.
Exactly. And with Spider-Man, I think what's helped define the character is the 3 interpretations, just because with Sam Raimi and Mark Webb, I think people kind of figured out what the pillars of the character are because of those 2 things. Even if you've never read a comic, you kind of know the beats of his story until you become Spider-Man. So then that kind of allowed the MCU Spider-Man to kind of venture off and build upon what those 2 previous versions established. So he no longer is tied to his origin and kind of do his own thing, and people know the origin because of the other movies. So it kind of helped Tom Holland's Spider-Man evolve into a new phase of the character, similar to how I guess Ben Affleck's Batman is later in his career. He's no longer like starting out or in his prime. He's like on the back end. In BVS, he's very angry. He's very jaded by the world and what he's experienced. And in Justice League, he's like has a restored faith in humanity. But in both those versions, like in Justice League especially, he's not like a very tactile person. He knows he's out of his league, so he has to bring everyone else together. Like, we've never seen him really in his prime in the way we may have in like the Kevin Conroy version. Like with every other version, like he's either starting out or he's kind of in the earlier stages of his career. He's not really established the way people expect him to be established.
And now we're going back to that.
Yeah. Yeah, but I mean, Matt Reeves, like, I trust Matt Reeves.
Oh, 100%.
I hope he gets to make multiple movies just so we can get to the point where he has like a history of villains, a history of like maybe 1 or 2 Robins, and he has like a relationship with Catwoman, and like I hope we get to the point where we can have that version of the character in like 2 or 3 movies down the road.
I couldn't agree more. Matt Reeves is a great director, and what I always think of when I think of his name is when I was in high school, I was hanging out with a bunch of friends and I was exhausted. We're like, hey, you want to go see a movie and see Dawn of the Planet of the Apes? And I'm like half dead. I'm like, no, I don't want to see a fucking ape movie. Like I'm fucking barely awake right now. I don't have time for this. And we go to the theater and I'm like, great, I just spent like $8 to sleep in a fucking seat. And as soon as the movie began, I didn't even blink because it's just so enticing. I'm just so invested in these characters. I never even saw Rise. And I'm here like, yeah, dude, take down fucking Coda. You can do it. Like like if a director can do that, as annoying as it is to go back to square one with redoing Batman again with an origin and starting from the beginning, it's good to know you have a director who can really handle that and really grasp that. So it is exciting. And I agree. I hope he does get multiple films down the line, because you made a great example of Spider-Man by saying when they did Tom Holland's Spider-Man, you don't need to do the origin. Everyone's seen it because the other films aren't that old. Why do it a third time? Take advantage of that, which is perfect. That's another thing I always thought was really interesting about Tim Burton's Batman. When it starts off, you know, it's some family going to see a movie, they go down an alley and you're like, oh, this is Batman's origin. That kid's gonna become Bruce. And they do the swerve by, you know, the family's gonna get gunned down, and then Batman swoops down and saves them. It's really taking advantage of the fact you know the origin of Batman, you know how that's how it's created. Now we're gonna show you he's already created and he's saving someone's life, which is a perfect way of starting out that character.
Yeah, what's interesting about that though is that was the first Batman movie.
Yeah, 100%.
So I mean, they kind of trusted the fact that people already knew the character beforehand.
Yeah.
Even before he had like live action interpretation past like Adam West and everything, which they're trying to buck that trend, because when people thought of Batman back then, it was Adam West. So they went in the complete opposite direction, and they kind of trusted the audience enough to know what he was doing. So I just think that was very interesting, that they didn't need to do the origin, even though this was like the first version of the character that we've seen on screen.
I think the first time you actually see Thomas and Martha Wayne die in live action is in Batman Begins.
Yeah.
Because you don't see it in the 60s show either, or in the 40s serials. But it's just so funny how synonymous his origin is with people that it's like, we don't have to show you. You know what happened. Like in the 60s show, the first episode, they do say what happened to his parents at the very beginning, but they don't have to show it. Same with 89. It's funny how people just trust that they know the origins of these characters.
Yeah, especially... Yeah, because today, like, if you look at Sam Raimi's Spider-Man, like, they knew they had to do an origin story. And then Andrew Garfield did it, I think, like 10 years later. And they did the origin story, too, even though his first movie wasn't that old. It was only, like, 10 years old.
Yeah.
And they still had to redo the origin and then build on top of that. So that's very interesting that Batman never started with an origin. And then later interpretations did the origin anyway, just to get people familiar with it, I guess. Yeah, that's very... Even in Batman v Superman, the beginning is Batman's origin.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's interesting.
What is your feeling on adapting a source material and like deviations for it, for comic books especially?
Yeah, I guess my feelings is just trust the filmmakers to do what they're going to do with it, because in comics, like, there are so many different versions of it. I'm sure one version of that character in the comics is exactly what the filmmaker is going for. Whatever is in the comics, the filmmaker's version, it will be synonymous to that, just because there's so many different versions of the characters, and there's so many Elseworlds stories that take the characters into weird directions. With DC, there's like Injustice, there's Batman Arkham, there's different game interpretations, different story interpretations. So just trust the filmmakers to know what they're doing. Judge everything based on the movie, not the source material. Just because, even though I think everyone is tied to the source material or tied to their favorite versions of the characters, the directors might not be influenced by the same things you're influenced by. So just trust what they're doing and then judge everything based on what the movie is trying to do, and not go back to the source material, or else you will be disappointed, because the director is a different person than you, and they're gonna try to do something different than you might do.
I think bias is always interesting because it can always wave you in one direction or the other. You know, Zack Snyder's Justice League just came out not that long ago, and you know, I'm not a huge fan of his films for the DC universe. I do love Man of Steel. I wasn't big on BVS, and then the Justice League 2017 came out. It's literally just like, it's a movie that is synonymous with you watch scenes on YouTube and that's it, you know?
Basically.
And then this film came out, and like, as a bias, like, some things really do irk me, but as a film, just in general, I think it's really enticing and it's a lot of fun. And I think he does a great job of managing a lot in that film. It's 4 hours and it's like, well, that might be elongated. Well, that's what happens when you have to introduce 3 new characters pretty much. And it's good to see, even when you're getting through the film, like, you can worry about like, oh, is Flash gonna feel like he's annoying or is he gonna be a pain? And by the end of the film, you're like, he got a finalized arc synonymous with that film. It doesn't have anything else set up. That feels great. Cyborg is arguably the main character of the film, gets his completed arc, feels great to see that happen. Aquaman doesn't get a fully completed arc, but you get enough to know the character and get attached to him. He gets a movie afterwards, works well. Wonder Woman had a film beforehand, don't need an arc. She's a great setup character that works in the universe, perfect. Batman, Superman, don't even have to go over it. Everything in the film functions as a perfect film, which I think is what's important. It's hard for a lot of comic fans to take out that bias of being a comic fan. Sometimes it does be a benefit, and other times it can literally be a curse. That's why for me, it's really hard to enjoy some of the Marvel properties because, you feel like everything becomes the same old shit a lot of the time. Or like, if there's a cool idea, they don't run with it, and you're like, oh, come on, man. Just do something.
Yeah.
Just
Like
really...
a lot of Marvel films, I guess, feel like they're setting up other, like they'll pay things off down the road, but even when they pay something off, they're setting something else up that will be paid off down the road. So even with Endgame, like Endgame feels like a complete movie, but also sets up like 20 other things and 20 other avenues to travel down. So it still feels open-ended, even though it's supposed to be the end of a 20 film arc.
Yeah.
So
100%.
it does kind of feel exhausting after a while if you have to constantly be keeping up, and then you can't criticize what you don't get in this movie because it will be paid off later because it is kind of functioning like television in a way. Like you can't complain about one episode when 5 episodes later you'll figure out what you want to figure out. So yeah, it's just very interesting trying to figure out exactly what Marvel is doing just because they're always planning ahead. So even if you're not going to get a payoff right now, you'll get it later. So like you have to be patient with it, I guess.
I think television is a great way to put it, though, is because you're right. They're trying to plan ahead, but they do structure it like television. So that's why it can be kind of annoying when they try to pay it off later on, but it just feels like things don't add up or like they didn't plan far enough ahead. And it's just like, okay, now this is happening. What is it now? Falcon and Winter Soldier's out right now. And like, for me, that is like, oh, Winter Soldier is one of my favorite Marvel characters. And watching him in this show, it's like torture. And this show is so tough to get through for me.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Like,
I haven't watched any of the Marvel TV ones yet. I want to catch up on WandaVision just because like I love that relationship in the movies. Like that's why I like Age of Ultron a lot, even though a lot of people hate that movie.
mm-hmm.
But I like that movie because Vision is great in it, and like his arc in that movie feels complete. Like it feels very interesting. His dichotomy with Ultron, kind of that relationship, and I like Wanda's setup, and that's like. And even in Civil War, even though I don't love that movie, I like those two in it. So yeah, I mean, I'm gonna check that one out eventually, but I don't know if I'll watch Falcon Winter Soldier.
Don't take my word for it. Obviously there's cool stuff. It's just some of it's tough. I think it's funny you mentioned that because I wasn't interested at all in Vision. I thought for most of the part, like his character is whatever and I can't get interested in it. But in this show, he's great. He's fantastic. He's like, to me, the standout. Yeah. My biggest problem with their relationship in the movies is that it's set up off screen and then it's like, yeah, cool, they're together. But like
that's one of the biggest problems with Infinity War is like when you catch up with them, they're already a couple. You never saw the setup to that. And they don't even get that much screen time. Like they get maybe like 10-15 minutes and then Vision is killed, and then the next movie you don't even get that either. So then the show has to do a lot of work to get you interested in their relationship that wasn't set up in the movies.
I couldn't agree more, and that's why I think it's really interesting to see that they do such a great job with the relationship, because they do have a lot of work to showcase because the movies didn't do any of it. And when the show starts off, you're like, I buy it. I'm really interested. I'm liking these characters. I love the connection they have. I won't speak for the rest of the show because it can be tough, and I hope you see it, but I do think their relationship is fantastic in the show.
Yeah, that's nice to hear, just because they're probably two of my favorite characters in the movies, from the movies. So I want to catch up on the show eventually, just haven't found time yet. And I'm gonna binge it probably one of these days.
Mm-hmm. Do you think the medium of comics is different from other mediums, such as books or films? Because when books do adaptations, people get very serious about sticking to it and getting it correct. But with comics, you even brought up like there's so many different interpretations. Do you think that that's why there's so much creative freedom with that property?
Yeah, and with comics, I think it's already a visual medium, so it opens itself up to interpretation to film because they are kind of similar. And like even with comics, like the way characters are framed within the panel Like you could easily translate that into movies and kind of borrow that visual language. But then with movies, you obviously have to add upon it, just because comics are what, like 30 pages, and then one story is maybe 150, and there, even though there's a lot of visuals, there's also a lot of text, so they are different. But I mean, comics opens itself up to interpretation just because there's so many different versions, and also it's already visual. So I mean, with film, it's easy to kind of translate that language over to film and kind of build upon it with connective tissue and kind of how to set things up.
Yeah, I would agree. I know I can not be critical about interpretations. I think for me, because I've been reading comics for more than half of my life, and I think there was a point when I was younger where it's like the farther they stray with an adaptation, the more annoying it would be.
Yeah.
And then nowadays, I get more annoyed when people complain about it because I'm like, dude, who cares? Just read the book. Like, read a comic if you really are that mad about this interpretation. Like, what does it really matter?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, if you're looking for an interpretation of a character, you'll find that in the comics.
Yeah.
Even if it's not in the movie you're watching, you'll find it in the comics. So just go read those.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's tougher when there are like secluded graphic novels. Like if it is one story and that's adapted and they do a little too much freedom with it, I can understand it being annoying, but at the same time, the argument still does kind of stand. If you really don't like the interpretation, you can just not like that and go back to the comic.
Yeah, I mean, standalone graphic novel is more in line with like book adaptations, just because they're singular entities. So when you do stray away from it, you kind of question why you made that specific choice, just because it's already one way in the book. And then if you make a choice in the movie to do something else, you kind of have to begin to justify your choice to the audience, or else they're gonna know like what you changed or what you didn't.
So speaking of adaptations, and for like taking some and leaving some, what would you say are some of your favorite interpretations of characters, live action or animated?
One of my favorite like things is Teen Titans Go, even though that's like nothing like their comic counterparts. I think that show and the two movies they've had within the past decade are hilarious, and like they are really good at kind of riffing on the material. Like, I think they do a better job at the Deadpool movies personally, just because they're not worried about kind of fitting into the structure of what a comic book movie should be. They're the entire time they're making fun of it, even if they kind of fit into certain boxes, they're still poking holes in it. Like one of the darkest jokes is them pushing Batman's parents into crime alley.
Oh yeah.
Teen Titans Go.
I love that movie. I really love that movie.
Yeah, I love that movie too. And like for a cartoon about these characters, like that's one of the darkest jokes that have been in a comic book movie, and it works for those characters, and I think that's hilarious, even if they are nothing like the show that I grew up on. But I mean,
why would you want them to be though? You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's why people hate that show, because it's not the show they like. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But I mean, it's not trying to be that show. So I like the different version of these characters.
That's the thing. I think maybe the show would have benefited from changing the character designs a little bit more, because then it could not be so synonymous with that other show. But it's called Teen Titans Go. It's not the same show. It isn't trying to be the same show. I've never understood why people were so mad they changed. It's like, oh, it's not at all like the same style. It's like, it never told you it was going to be. It's really not a fair criticism to say you don't like it. If you say, I don't think the sense of humor lands and most of the jokes fall flat, that's fair. That's a criticism. That's a fair criticism. Comparing it to another show that has nothing to do with it, you're really just like picking and choosing at this point. You want to not like it.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people haven't even watched the show. They just like know the character designs and then comparing it to the old one, which doesn't make sense.
I think the movie was great to come out too, because it almost told you like, yeah, we're gonna have fun. It's not the show you used to watch, but like, watch this film, you can still have fun with it and realize it may be different, but it doesn't mean it's bad.
Yeah, exactly.
There's so many funny jokes in that show. Like it's just in that movie in general. Like I remember the end of it when they're trying to have their big monologue and he like gets pushed off and Robin's like, oh, ask your parents where babies come from. And it just ends right there. And it's like, just imagine the families that had to have like that question asked, like, I can't believe this movie just did this to me. Like,
yeah. And isn't it like a PG movie or something? So,
yeah, 100%.
A lot of parents, a lot of families went to that movie, and then for like the younger kids who like the show, like they're gonna ask their parents that question. I thought that was hilarious. That I even like Teen Titans Go versus Teen Titans.
I only dislike sometimes like they don't balance humor and seriousness sometimes in that movie. With them putting the other Teen Titans in, it's a little different, but there's definitely some enjoyable aspects to it. I definitely don't think it's a bad movie.
Yeah, I just like I like how big it got, and then I think they're riffing on the fact that a lot of people don't like the Teen Titans Go.
Yeah.
That's like one of the main things about it is like they're bringing in these other Titans, but then they're fitting them into the Teen Titans Go world, and they obviously don't work.
Yeah.
They don't work together. So yeah, I thought that aspect of the movie worked really well and kind of made fun of the people that would hate on the movie because of the Go characters. So
I also think one of the jokes in that movie that I thought was funniest is they would always bring up how like the original Teen Titans Robin is so much cooler than the Teen Titans Go Robin. It's like, oh, he's so much cooler. And then when they meet other Titans, they see the animated movies Nightwing, and he's like, oh, he's way cooler than Teen Titans Robin. He's like, God damn it, like.
Yeah, man. I love the ending too because it does feel like a riff on Endgame with
all 100%, yeah,
with all the portals opening and everyone fighting together. And yeah, I like the way that movie played out, even though like the Teen Titans characters aren't who they were in their show.
Yeah,
but like they're retrofitted to fit into this world, so I thought it worked.
I would agree. They're not from the one from the show, but it's told from, like you said, almost the perspective of how Teen Titans Go would picture those characters. Yeah, so exactly. It does work. I'm not gonna say everyone's gonna love it, but I think it's fun and interesting, and it's definitely worth a watch. And I'm a big Teen Titans fan, so like I have a huge bias towards it. Like it was just great to see a lot of those characters come back, and it's awesome to see like the George Perez Titans just in a movie.
Yeah,
and, you know, you even mentioned how like they do their humor kind of like Deadpool, but they riff on Endgame. It's like, yeah, they should be able to utilize humor like that through animation. It's astounding how they don't try to lend stuff like that more towards animation or just utilize animation in general with a lot of their films.
Yeah, I think that type of humor also works better in animation because there's no budget. So you could basically do anything and it'll cost the same.
Yeah, I would agree.
Yeah.
How many mainstream adaptations really interested you in reading the character?
At first it was probably, Man of Steel was the big one that kind of got me interested in Superman. And then I went back and started reading Batman because, I knew of the Chris Nolan movies. So I knew I should probably start reading Batman just because that's like the next big character on the list. And then after that, it was mostly Man of Steel. And then after that, I kind of branched off from the comics into other characters. It wasn't like I didn't get interested in them because of their movies, just because like Wonder Woman was still 4 or 5 years away. And then Green Arrow too, like the show. I watched the Green Arrow show, and then that got me interested in reading some of the comics, even though that show is nothing like the comics.
Yeah,
but I still enjoyed the show until I jumped off just because there was way too much to keep up with. But I still liked that version. I liked the show enough to keep going. But the character in the comics is way different. He's even the visualization, like I don't know why they didn't just give him a goatee in the show. He would have looked fine with it, but it's whatever.
That shows a funny example, because I think that really tests me, because a lot of times it's like I'm okay with interpretations being different, and the first season starts out and it's very different. It's like, whatever, man, make it different. But it's more like as the seasons progress, it's like saying, hey, look at this, we're like the comics. And it's like, hey dude, shut up, you can't fool me. This isn't like the comics. This isn't even interesting. When that was coming out, I remember I would talk with my friends being like, oh, the show's coming out, I can't wait to see what character is going to be announced in it, what they're going to do. And then like by the 4th season, I'm like, I really fucking hope this character doesn't show up. Like, please.
Yeah. I think 1, 2, and 5 are the good seasons, and then 3 and 4 are like the really, really bad seasons.
I jumped off after halfway in season 4. I couldn't do it anymore, but I'll take your word for it.
I think season 2 is genuinely like really, really great.
Yeah, I think 1 and 2 are great.
Deathstroke was really, really good. Like the way he was brought to screen, and then his relationship with Oliver, I thought that worked really well. So season 2 is still like the high mark for that.
Yeah, season 3 was definitely the point where it became too much for me. That's to me the lowest. Like
it felt like they were listening to like a lot of what the fans wanted, and they're trying to like shovel up.
Oh yeah.
Not even the comics fan, like the Tumblr fans.
That show has always catered to the Tumblr fans.
Yeah, so in 3 and 4 it became obvious what they were trying to do. Yeah. And it didn't work. It didn't work at all.
My favorite thing in 3 is that they introduced Ra's al Ghul, which they whitewashed the character again for God knows how many reasons. Like Christopher Nolan doing Liam Neeson. All right, dude, the man made Memento in so many other great films. You get a free pass. All right, you want to do that? Cool. It's 2005. Whitewashing apparently is okay at this point. Not a big deal. This show came out in it's like 2014 at this point. They do it again, and every character in the League of Assassins calls him Ra's al Ghul. Oliver every single time calls him Raz Al Ghul. That makes Oliver Queen a fucking confirmed racist.
Yeah.
I don't care what anyone says. If he's the only person that does that, when everyone else says, "Hey, Ra's al Ghul," "Hey, Raz," all right, dude, you're just being insensitive. Like,
Yeah, no. The show, like, I feel like the showrunners need to like have a conversation about what they wanted to call the character. Just have it be consistent. Like, whoever was directing, like, let the actor know, like, this is what he's called. Try to say it like this. Practice with them or something. Just make it consistent. You can't have different characters calling him different things.
I totally agree.
Especially when you're hearing other characters call him something else, and then you should try to emulate that. Emulate them at least.
Do you think at all when that season was going on, it's like, yeah, they're using a different name. Should I do it? I don't fucking care. Whatever. Like,
that wasn't their focus on that was like Oliver and Felicity.
Yeah.
They weren't worried about the other side.
Yeah. Can you kiss the blonde girl some more? Yeah, no problem.
Basically.
Nah, I couldn't agree more. And like you said, they've always catered to their fans to the point where like things would just be illogical about how they come to these decisions. But it doesn't matter because their viewership doesn't decline, because the viewers that do keep watching are teenagers that are just going along for the ride, getting what they want.
Yeah, I mean, it's a CW show, so you know kind of what you're getting into. Like, that's their main audience is the Tumblr people.
Yeah.
So they have to keep them happy.
I think the biggest question that everyone asks nowadays, and why, you know, people still bring this up constantly for years, is, do you think comic characters have oversaturated the mediums of film and TV?
I would have thought so, like maybe a year or two ago, but now I think that we need more variety in the kinds of stories that are being told. Like, I think the MCU feels saturated just because a lot of those movies kind of have the same tone and vibe. So there's not a lot of variation in what you're getting. And they release like 4 movies a year. Now they're doing TV shows. So there's not a lot of variety in what you're getting from them. And then with DC, it's still kind of hard to tell what they'll be doing in the future. I just think instead of getting rid of these kinds of stories, just kind of add variety to it. Like, visualize things in a different way. Try to bring your own flavor to it. Maybe we could start seeing more indie books being brought to screen, like Invincible's doing right now. I like Bloodshot. I know people don't like that movie. I thought Bloodshot, just because I like Vin Diesel, so I like Bloodshot. I like how that character was kind of visual, like how his powers were visualized and things like that. Even if you don't like that movie, I think it's cool that Bloodshot can be brought to screen, and I think more indie books like that should be brought to screen, and just to show you something else that the big 2 companies might not be willing to give you. Just try to add more variety to what you're doing. You know what I mean?
I would agree. I think, you know, the option is always nice, and you should always feel like nothing's off the table. And as long as you feel like there's enough possibility, that should be what's most important. The cool thing is, like you're saying, we do need more variety. A lot of people always talk about that quote that Martin Scorsese said, where, you know, a lot of these films do feel like just like theme park rides. And it's like, that's why for me, it always bugs me that like he definitely feels right most of the time, because you do feel like they're not testing any boundaries. And it's like, if you read these comics, you know, a lot of these characters can do so much more, and you hate feeling like they become wasted potential.
Yeah, I mean, the comics can get into really like weird out there territory, especially like when they kind of go cosmic and bring that element into it. And a lot of the movies try to kind of streamline that aspect of these worlds to kind of fit into a mainstream structure, and that kind of, I guess, robs them of what they can be, because the comics do get like weird and go into like really subversive territory sometimes, and that's not always translated to the movies, because the movies are trying to make everything as accessible as possible to the most people. And when you're spending that much money, you kind of have to, which is why I want like mid-budget movies to come back. Like, make like a $30 million Deathstroke movie, or like make like a $20 million Moon Knight movie. Like, do something like that where you can give more creative freedom, because you're not investing as much money. When you're investing $200 million in a movie, you need to micromanage it to make sure it reaches as many people as possible. And that kind of robs them of their individuality sometimes.
Yeah, I think Shazam's a perfect example of that. You know, it was like a $90 million budget, and it's like it made like $496 million or whatever. People consider it a loss because it didn't make like $1 billion, but it's like, no, but that's still really good for its budget. You shouldn't expect that much. And a lot of these films should be lower budgeted, especially the vigilante characters. You don't need a Batman movie that costs $250 million. You don't. Like, you could do it. You definitely could, but it feels like you're wasting your money. Unless you're going to put 150 of it into marketing, go for it. But besides that, what's the point of wasting that much money on characters that you can keep grounded?
Like with Black Widow coming out, like I know they spent over probably 150 million just in making that movie. You can make that for 60 million. Don't have to put as much into marketing. And with the Marvel brand attached to it, it'll still make around 600, 700, maybe even more. And you could get a higher return on investment. But companies don't think that way. Like they need everything to be as big and as loud as possible, I guess, just to kind of just to keep the brand consistent or something. I'm not sure, but with Black Widow, like you could easily make an espionage thriller for like 60 million, and it'll probably be better than what they're trying to do. But
I would almost guarantee it. Because you don't need to put so much money into it. And you feel like the more money they put into it, the less they really care about it. Like, what's wrong with taking chances, but not making that chance bankrupt you?
Yeah, exactly. Like if you're putting 50 to 60 million in a movie, you don't need to micromanage it. You could kind of give a lot more freedom because it's not going to be as big a loss if it doesn't make money. Like Joker was only $60 million. No one expected much out of that movie. They kind of let Todd Phillips do whatever he wanted, and it made $1 billion. So I mean, you could make movies like that, and it could make bank. And even if it doesn't, you're not losing as much as you would be if you're making like a 150 to $200 million thing.
I think the Joker's a funny thing to bring up because it is a low budget and they're making a lot of money out of it. And it's funny to think about now they have Black Adam coming out and they casted The Rock in it, which means they are expecting a lot of money to get brought into it.
Yeah.
And they're going to put a lot of money into it. And if they don't get the return on it, they're really going to hurt themselves.
Yeah, that's true. But with Black Adam, he's kind of, you need to put a lot of money into that character, I think, just because he is so big. Like, I think Shazam could be a little more street level because he's like a kid who's kind of getting started. But with Black Adam, you need like a big name attached to it. You need the visual effects. You need to make it feel big for that character specifically. But with other characters, like street level characters, I think you could make it for like $50 million and then get a higher return on investment.
I would agree. I think investment in general is important in a character. What gets you invested the most in a character when you're first getting introduced to them?
For me personally, it's like the visual aesthetic of the character. Like when you see them on screen, they have to feel iconic. Like again with Superman, like his ground on the fist and the dirt rising above it as he's about to take off to fly. To me, that grabbed my attention right away. And with the Wonder Woman, it was 5 years later, but the Nomadland scene, like that right there is like, you get who the character is right there. And the way it was visualized, like with her shield, holding up the shield as bullets are flying at her, and she's kind of distracting the enemy so everyone else can go behind her. That was really interesting. So for me personally, like comic books are a visual medium and film is a visual medium. So like you need to have a visual aesthetic that I'm interested in before I want to begin reading the source material. In the source material, like Superman, like when he shows up on a panel, like it looks very, very iconic. Like, you know, the S, like how it's painted on, or how it's drawn, like the light blue, the red S, things like that. Like when you read comics, like I think the best comic artists know how to visualize something to draw your attention, and then kind of the story will help guide you through their world. But the most important for me personally is like the visualization of them, because that is the first introduction you need. And then after that, like once you start reading the stories, that will help guide you into everything else.
All right. What do you think is one of the biggest sins of a film or a show when it comes to producing superhero content?
For me, that again is like the visuals. Like the visuals feel kind of flat a lot of the time. Like you don't get as much. Like there's a lot of grayscale maybe. It doesn't make me interested in wanting to learn more when I see a movie and the visuals don't grab me. Like for me, I wanted to begin reading. I started reading some Iron Man comics because of Iron Man 3, but the first two Iron Mans didn't really grab me in that way for me to want to actually get into the character. It was Iron Man 3 that kind of got me there, because I felt like the visual design of the movie really stood out, especially like when his house is getting bombed, and like the way he like grabs the helmet, puts it on Pepper, and then kind of flies out, like the slow motion and that, like it really drew my attention. That kind of made me more interested in the character than I had been before. So again, it's like the visual design of the character and of the movie kind of needs to get me interested before I want to begin diving deeper into them.
I think that's fair. I think it's a great way to bring up how like comics are a visual medium. Why are you not utilizing that? Is a great point. You know, one of the things that got me into doing art in general was just reading comic books, because you feel like you get so much art from there that's so varied, not just in quality, but just like technique and style. And it's like you can have Batman drawn completely different by 80 artists, but you could still know it's Batman.
Yeah.
Utilize that, showcase that. You look at all the interpretations of Batman on screen, and they're all completely done differently, but they all feel like Batman. And that's what's awesome. Show the iconography, make sure you can define the character with an aesthetic and run with it. That's why people really love the Burton films so much, because his entire atmosphere feels so complete. It feels like it's realized. He has his style and he really went with it.
Yeah, like that feels like an extension of Tim Burton.
Yes.
Like with a lot of comic books, like they feel like sometimes they can feel like an extension of the producer trying to kind of keep everything in line with their specific vision. And then the filmmakers come in to kind of execute that. But with artists like a Tim Burton, like you can't tone that down.
No.
He needs to be able to do what he needs to be able to do what he does.
Yeah.
I even like Batman Forever a lot, and a lot of that has to do with kind of the visualization of Batman and that world in general. It feels very specific, and it feels like a throwback to Adam West in a way, but it feels very specific. And even like the fight scenes, how characters look in frame, it feels specific to Joel Schumacher. So that kind of draws my interest before anything else within a comic book store or comic book world.
I agree. I get a lot of shit for it because I love Forever, but not just Forever, but like if you want to be honest, even in Batman and Robin, there's a lot of shots in there that are very visually strong. I know there's the time when Batgirl is in the stupid motorcycle race and like you know, Robin's going with her. A lot of like the neon or the way the colors like hit on screen are very like visually strong. That's why like when I think of that movie, I think of that scene a lot because it really stands out to me.
Yeah, like for me, that's Batman Forever does get a lot of flack just because it's not what people picture of the character. But at the same time, it does feel like Joel Schumacher purposely trying to do Adam West.
Yeah.
So it does have a basis in the source material. His influences aren't your influences, so that kind of turns people off, I think. And also like it's trying to be cheesy.
Yeah.
But that's not everyone's taste. But yeah, I just like the way he visualizes his Gotham. It feels very specific to him. And even with like Mark Webb's Spider-Man, like I like those movies just because I like his visual perspective on them, especially his Spider-Man 2, where it feels like New York is a part of the mythology of Spider-Man. Like he is very ingrained in New York, and the visualization of that, like with the neon lights, his fight with Electro, the way he swings alone, like the way the camera kind of glides with him, and it feels like you're free falling before he puts a web up and then swings away. Like that feels very, very Spider-Man like to me. So that's kind of what draws me to those movies, even though like story-wise they are a mess, but I can forgive them because like the visual aesthetic of them is so strong.
Yeah, I don't think web swinging has been as visually strong as it has in Mark Webb's films.
Yeah, exactly. Like that's my favorite version of the like action in Spider-Man, just because like his camera work in that is so strong to me.
I think the biggest question I have to ask is, do you think superheroes benefit cinema currently? How long term do you think like the properties of superheroes are, or do you think it's more like a trend, like you know how like the Western was around for like 30 years and then it kind of died out?
I don't think they benefit cinema currently, just because I feel like everything is trying to fit within a certain box and it feels very homogenous to me. Like that's why like I gravitate towards Zack Snyder's superhero movies, just because they feel so distinct and so personal to him. And that's why like with Marvel, like after Iron Man 3, like it felt like they were kind of starting to all try to be similar. And Iron Man 3 got a lot of backlash because it felt so distinct and it didn't make choices that the audience would make. So then I feel like the movies they made after Iron Man 3 kind of had to fit in a box, and the filmmakers didn't get to imprint themselves on it as much. So that kind of became homogenous to me. But I feel like with superheroes, like what will be their downfall is the homogeneity. Just because if you see something enough times, you get bored of it. That's just a fact. So I mean, unless like different adaptations can begin to differentiate themselves, then you will start to see more variety in what you're getting. Like even with the Western, like every Western didn't feel the same. You know what I mean? Like there were different genres in the Western. Like a Western could still be driven by their directors. With superhero movies, it feels like they're being driven by producers. That might be the difference. Just because if you're driven by one vision over like 10 or 20 films, and then that vision becomes a little samey after a while, and that will eventually probably be their downfall. But I think if they can begin to be different, you know what I mean? Like maybe Snyder's Justice League can kind of open the door and show studios like you don't have to follow Marvel. You can kind of do your own thing. I hope like even though Bloodshot isn't a great movie, like that shows me that studios might be willing to take a chance on different properties, even if it's not Marvel or DC. You'll still try to like get superhero movies made and put your own stamp on them. That will help keep the genre alive because you can't just have the same two companies kind of duking it out. That will just drive interest away, I think.
I think it's funny how at the beginning this word was a sign of things to come, and now it's become a thing of a curse. And the word is streamlined.
Yeah.
You know, streamlining like the continuity or like films together has become a thing that made people feel like we can actually develop a world out of it. But now streamlining it has caused things to feel like it can only go so far, or they can't really try anything new or really branch out and give you variety. There's no reason superhero movies can't attack a ton of different genres, but you almost feel like you're never getting a different genre. You're getting an idea of a different genre. Like people
Yeah,
tell
like
you it's like Captain America films, like, oh, Winter Soldier is like a political thriller. Is it though? Ant-Man's like a heist movie. Is it though? Like there's the idea of those things, but they're not finalized.
yeah, exactly. Like I think Marvel does a good job of kind of giving us a feel for different genres, but then everything also has to come back to being a Marvel movie. So that kind of takes precedence over it. So I mean, you could describe Ant-Man as a heist movie, but at the same time, like it feels like Captain America. It doesn't like differentiate itself enough to feel distinct in its own genre. It has to feel like a lot of the other movies to continue the series because they have to kind of keep everything similar so everything feels like it fits in the same world. Like with Thanos, like I know a lot of people love the characterization of him in the Marvel movies, but in the comics, like his motivation is he's in love with death and he wants to kill the world to please her, basically. And like that is a lot more interesting than whatever they did with him. But they couldn't do what they did in the comics because they didn't feel like the general audience would be able to stick with it. So they had to kind of change his motivation to something we could understand better. And that made him less interesting of a character to me. But that's kind of what a lot of comic adaptations have to do. They kind of have to make themselves more boring to fit into the world that the general audience might be able to understand. And that might end up being their downfall because they're not pushing the medium as far as they could.
I would agree. It's funny how you mentioned like, oh, we have to fit a certain mold to make it work. When you brought up earlier how, Batman Forever got a lot of flack because it was so different. It's because in that time period, people wanted Batman to stay serious and people didn't want to go back to the 60s. And that's what kind of harmed it. It's kind of like, in my perspective, how like James Bond was seemed to be very like fun, have a good time, entertaining. And then when the Dalton films came out, they tried to be more serious and people weren't ready for that. And they weren't fans of it. And nowadays, people want a serious Bond.
Yeah.
There's just sometimes when people have a certain expectation. So when people do something different, they don't get rewarded for it. And now companies don't even want to try to take the chance anymore.
Yeah, I mean, people want like the things they like to be taken seriously, and that's why kind of they are opposed to kind of the more goofy aspects of the characters because like they want the general audience to feel like they do. So the only way they feel like they can get that is the more serious tone. That's why to me, like if Sam Raimi made his Spider-Man movies for today, they would probably be panned across the board, or audiences wouldn't vibe with them just because they have a more goofy tone and audiences have kind of moved on past that and now they want something a little more serious. And if it is goofy, they kind of want the movies to make fun of that goofiness, kind of be self-aware in a way to kind of point out to the audience that they don't take that seriously either. Where like Sam Raimi was a very sincere filmmaker, and the Spider-Man movies are very sincere in what they want to accomplish. And I feel like audiences kind of move past that sincerity because it is a little more goofy than they would allow for their movies to be.
How much do you expect to happen out of both DC and Marvel trying to attack like the multiverse. Do you think that's going to expand the idea of variety, or do you think it's just another idea that they're not going to flesh out really?
With Marvel, I think they might try to do it, but I think with both companies, they'll try to do it like the comics. Like they'll try to attack the multiverse in a way that kind of unite all the characters before shutting it off again. Like what I think what the Flash movie will do is kind of reset continuity, and then they'll go from there. They won't like explore the multiverse in a way that would be fulfilling as a fan of that concept in comics. They'll kind of try to streamline it into a new universe moving forward. And then with Marvel, I think they just want everything to be in continuity. So I think Doctor Strange might like go into the multiverse, but at the end of the movie, like he'll be back in our world, and then we won't see much of that again, unless like Marvel wants to kind of push their R-rated characters into like a multiverse world, like put Moon Knight, put Blade like into a different world. Doctor Strange can kind of touch on that world and then come back, and then we'll know like they set up a new world for these R-rated characters. But I don't think they'll get as weird as they could, just because they want they want these movies to appeal to as many people as possible. And I think execs are kind of scared that if they go too out there with it, they'll push people away. So I don't think they'll go as far as they could.
I can definitely see that perspective. It always feels like you're getting an easy way out and they don't want to take it.
Yeah, exactly.
You could use the multiverse to really create a whole lot of different ideas and explore, but I hate to agree, but it is just feel like they're just trying to make things more streamlined,
Yeah, I mean, when you're putting this much money into something, like you want as big a return on investment. Mm-hmm. And I mean, they spent like $1 billion on the two last Avengers movies combined. So they needed those movies to make over $1 billion to even be profitable. So they kind of had to micromanage all of that to kind of give you every payoff you expect, kind of set up characters in ways you want them set up so then they could be paid off down the road. Like they needed to set that story up in a way where they could make as much money as possible. And when you're looking at art through that perspective of just trying to make money, it kind of lessens what you can do, because the weirder you get, like the more people will be turned off by it. That's just how it works. And if you're putting so much money into something, you don't want people to be turned off by it. So you can't go as out there as you might need to.
Yep, I would agree. That's why comics is such a damned if you do, damned if you don't medium, because you can explore so much. Because publishing stuff in books, it's not that difficult. You can always just kind of take your ideas and run with it. But when it gets adapted, you can only trust it to go so far sometimes.
Yeah, exactly. Like studios are kind of, even though Marvel is like the most successful franchise in history, they still are kind of afraid to like try new things just because they have one way of doing something. Mm-hmm. Like they're not going to make mid-budget movies. Everything they do is going to be $150 to $200 million budget. Another like 100 plus for marketing. Like it's going to be everywhere. And then so it's becoming harder to. I don't think studios are as interested in kind of giving us living up to the potential of comics, just because they're making movies and they need to. When you're investing so much, they need to make their money back.
I think that's the best way to put it. I think people really need to realize that potential is one thing, but money is more important to studios. That's what it's always going to come down to, is that, are we going to make money? I don't know. Well, then I don't want to pull through. So that's pretty much all I have to ask. And thank you so much for answering the questions and giving me your perspective.
All right, for sure, man. This was fun.
Awesome.
All right, no problem. See you.
Pretty cool, right? So I'm glad you checked it out. I'm glad you stayed the whole time, and I'm glad you had fun. So check out some of the other interviews, check out the main video, and tell me what you think. I'll catch you later now. Bye-bye.